The Colorado autumn air was heavy with grief as we laid Eleanor to rest beneath the golden aspen trees. 43 years of marriage, and I still couldn't believe she was gone. But before the dirt had even settled on her grave, my son-in-law Derek cornered me at the reception. "The old woman's gone, Marshall. Sign the papers. Sarah deserves what's rightfully hers," he said with ice-cold arrogance. His disrespect for Eleanor's memory ignited something fierce inside me, but I stayed calm. What Derek didn't know was that my brilliant wife had left me the ultimate weapon, a hidden letter, and evidence that would expose his greed. The DNA test results in my lawyer's briefcase would soon prove that his inheritance dreams were built on lies, and Eleanor's posthumous plan would destroy him completely. Before we continue with how my wife's secret evidence helped me crush his schemes in that explosive boardroom confrontation, please let us know in the comments where you're watching this from. This story of justice from beyond the grave has captivated audiences worldwide. My name is Marshall Keating, and at 67, I thought I knew everything about my family. I was wrong. The Colorado autumn air was crisp that morning as we laid my wife, Eleanor, to rest beneath the golden aspen trees at Fairmont Cemetery. 43 years of marriage, and I still couldn't believe she was gone. The scent of pine and fallen leaves mixed with the soft murmur of prayers, creating the sacred atmosphere that should have brought our family together in grief. The funeral service was everything Eleanor would have wanted, simple, dignified, filled with the genuine love of our Denver community. As the founder of Keating Construction, I'd built half the neighborhoods represented at that graveside. These weren't just business associates. They were friends who'd watched our family grow, who'd celebrated our successes and weathered our storms. I stood at the head of her casket, my hand resting on the polished cherry wood. Sarah, my daughter, wept quietly beside me, her blonde hair catching the morning sunlight. Her husband, Derek, stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, in what should have been a gesture of comfort. But something chilled me more than the mountain breeze. While Sarah's tears were genuine, while the entire gathering stood in respectful silence, Derek kept checking his watch. His expensive Italian shoes shifted impatiently on the grass. His eyes weren't on the casket, they were scanning the crowd, calculating. On the other side of the grave stood Rebecca Hayes, our senior project manager, and her husband Michael, our chief engineer. Rebecca's face was streaked with tears, her professional composure cracked by genuine grief. She'd worked alongside Eleanor on countless charity projects. Michael held her close, his own eyes red-rimmed. The contrast between their authentic sorrow and Derek's impatience settled in my chest like a stone. After the service, our home filled with the gentle chaos of a morning reception. Eleanor would have loved seeing her dining room table groaning under casseroles brought by neighbors. I moved through the rooms, accepting condolences, sharing stories about Eleanor's remarkable life as a retired teacher and community volunteer. As the afternoon wore on, I retreated to my study, needing a moment alone. The room still smelled like her lavender perfume and old books. Through the window, the Rocky Mountains stood eternal, the same view she'd admired every morning with her coffee. That's when Derek found me. "Marshall," he said, stepping in without invitation. His voice carried none of the reverence appropriate for a house in mourning. "I know today's difficult, but we need to talk about practical matters." I turned from the window, studying this investment banker who'd married my daughter 5 years ago. Tall, handsome, in an artificial way, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Eleanor would want us to move forward quickly with business matters," he continued. "The company needs decisive leadership. Sarah and I have been discussing the transition." "Derek," my voice cut through his presumption, "we buried my wife 3 hours ago." He looked momentarily embarrassed, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. This wasn't grief talking. This was opportunity knocking. Of course I didn't mean to seem insensitive." He backtracked smoothly. "But Eleanor always said you were too generous for your own good. Someone needs to protect your interests." The audacity took my breath away. Eleanor had never said anything of the sort. As Derek continued his rehearsed speech about family responsibilities, I found myself thinking about Rebecca's genuine tears, about Michael's steady support, and I wondered what other truths Eleanor might have seen that I'd been too blind to notice. That evening I couldn't bear the silence in our bedroom, so I found myself in Eleanor's study. The room felt sacred, untouched since her passing 2 weeks ago. Her reading glasses still sat folded on the mahogany desk, and her favorite fountain pen lay beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. The mountain view through the window was shrouded in darkness, but I could feel the Rockies standing sentinel in the night. I wasn't ready to pack away her life, but I needed to feel close to her somehow. I started with small things, organizing her books, straightening the papers she'd left, scattered with typical Eleanor charm. She'd always been brilliant but beautifully disorganized, leaving trails of half-finished projects that somehow always came together perfectly in the end. As I moved her heavy oak desk to vacuum beneath it, something felt wrong. The floorboard underneath shifted slightly under my weight. In 40 years of living in this house, I'd never noticed that particular board was loose. Grief makes you notice strange things, I suppose. Curiosity got the better of me. I knelt down my old knees protesting and worked my fingers around the edges of the plank. It lifted easily, revealing a small cavity I never knew existed. Inside was a simple cedar box, no bigger than a shoebox, with Eleanor's initials carved delicately into the lid. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. The box was heavier than expected, weighted with secrets I couldn't yet imagine. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, were 3 items that stopped my heart: a tiny lock of dark baby hair, tied with a ribbon, a yellowed hospital bracelet with Baby Girl Keating written in faded ink, and a thick envelope with my name written in Eleanor's elegant script. With shaking fingers, I opened Eleanor's letter, her familiar handwriting blurred through sudden tears, as I read words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. My dearest Marshall, if you're reading this, I've left you with one final burden. 40 years ago, I made a choice that has haunted every day since. The baby we brought home from the hospital, Sarah, was not the daughter I gave birth to. Our biological daughter lived, but circumstances forced a terrible decision that I pray you'll understand. I had to stop reading the words, swimming before my eyes. This was impossible. Sarah was our daughter. I'd held her as a newborn, watched her take her first steps, walked her down the aisle. But Eleanor's letter continued with devastating clarity. A mix-up occurred at the hospital. 2 babies, 2 desperate situations. I made a choice to protect you from unbearable pain, but I've carried this secret alone for 40 years. I've watched from afar, ensuring our true daughter was loved and cared for. She grew up strong, intelligent, and kind, everything we would have wanted. The letter went on to explain a complicated hospital situation involving a young, unwed mother and Eleanor's desperate decision in a moment of crisis. She'd spent decades secretly watching from a distance, making sure the child was safe and loved. I cannot tell you directly who she is. That discovery must be yours to make when the time is right. But I will say this, she has been closer than you know, and your heart has always recognized what your mind could not understand. Trust your instincts, my love. Trust what Eleanor Keating taught you about reading people's character. I sat in that study until dawn, reading and rereading Eleanor's confession, trying to process the impossible. The woman I'd loved and trusted for 43 years had built our entire family on a foundation of lies. Yet even in death, she was still protecting me, still thinking 3 steps ahead. Sarah wasn't my biological daughter. Somewhere out there was a woman who carried my blood, and Eleanor seemed to suggest I already knew her. And suddenly Derek's calculating behavior at the funeral took on a whole new meaning. He wasn't just being insensitive. He was positioning himself to inherit a fortune that wasn't rightfully his to claim. Eleanor had left me one final gift, the truth. Now I had to decide what to do with it. I didn't sleep that night. By 8 in the morning, I was pacing my kitchen with Eleanor's letter in my hand and my phone in the other. There was only one person I trusted with something this explosive: Margaret Sullivan, my attorney for the past 20 years, and one of Eleanor's closest friends. "Margaret, it's Marshall. I need to see you today. It's urgent." Her voice immediately shifted to professional concern. "Of course, Marshall. How are you holding up after the funeral? Is this about Derek pressuring you already?" "It's about Eleanor. She left me something, a letter. I can't discuss it over the phone." 2 hours later, I sat across from Margaret in her downtown Denver office, the city skyline stretching beyond her windows. At 55, she was sharp as a blade with silver-streaked hair, and the kind of steady presence that had guided me through every major business decision for 2 decades. She'd been Eleanor's friend even longer. I handed her the letter without preamble. "Read this. All of it." Margaret's expression shifted as she read, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine shock. When she finished, she set the pages down carefully and removed her reading glasses. "Eleanor was always 3 steps ahead of everyone, including me," she said quietly. "But this... Marshall, this changes everything." "Do you think it's true?" Margaret studied me with the same intensity she brought to cross-examinations. If Eleanor wrote this, she had proof. She never made claims she couldn't back up. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I need to know for certain. I need evidence that would hold up in court if Derek challenges anything. Margaret nodded, already shifting into strategic mode. We'll need medical records from the hospital, but those might be difficult to obtain after 40 years. However, I have an idea. She reached for her phone. Dr. Robert Martinez delivered both you and Sarah. He's retired now, but he might still have personal records. My husband plays golf with him every Thursday. The call took some convincing. Doctor-patient confidentiality runs deep even decades later. But Margaret had a way of explaining situations that made people want to help. After 20 minutes of careful conversation, she hung up with a satisfied expression. He'll see us tomorrow. He keeps personal files at his home office, says he's old-fashioned that way. If there's anything unusual about Sarah's birth, he'll remember it. And if he confirms what Eleanor wrote, then we'll need scientific proof, a DNA test properly documented. But Marshall, she leaned forward, are you prepared for what this might mean? Sarah is still the daughter you raised. Derek is still her husband. This could tear your family apart. I thought about Derek's calculating eyes at the funeral, his immediate pivot to business matters, while Eleanor's grave was still fresh. My family is already being torn apart. At least this way, I'll know who deserves to inherit what Eleanor and I built. That afternoon, I drove to a pharmacy and purchased a home DNA testing kit. The process seemed simple enough: saliva samples, mail-in analysis results in 48 hours. As I sat in my truck in the parking lot holding the box, I realized there was no going back from this moment. Eleanor had spent 40 years protecting me from this truth. Now I was about to uncover it anyway, because the alternative was letting Derek Sullivan destroy everything we'd worked for. I thought about the woman Eleanor hinted at in her letter, someone I already knew, someone whose character my heart had recognized. My mind wandered through faces of women in my life, employees, neighbors, friends' daughters, who had Eleanor been watching from afar, who carried the Keating blood without knowing it. The answer felt important, but right now I needed to focus on proving what I suspected about Sarah. Everything else would have to wait. I started the truck and drove home, ready to begin the most difficult investigation of my life. The next morning, Margaret and I sat in Dr. Martinez's cluttered home office in Cherry Hills Village. At 73, he was still sharp, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the steady hands that had delivered half of Denver over his 40-year career. I remember Eleanor, he said, pulling a thick file from an old cabinet. She was different after the delivery, more distressed than usual, even for a difficult birth. He spread yellowed pages across his desk, his personal notes kept separate from official hospital records. Look here. Patient exhibited unusual emotional distress post-delivery. Extended crying, refused initial bonding attempts, requested private consultation. Margaret leaned forward. That's not typical. New mothers can be emotional, certainly. But Eleanor was... It was like she was grieving instead of celebrating. I recommended psychological counseling, which was unusual for 1994. The pieces were falling into place, but we needed more. Margaret had her insurance investigator contact Blue Cross Blue Shield, diving into claims from 40 years ago. The bureaucracy was painful, but money talks, and Margaret knew how to make it speak loudly. By day 2, we had our answer. The insurance claims show extended stay psychological counseling. That's unusual, the investigator told us over the phone. Most births in 1984 were 2-day stays maximum. Your wife was there for a week. Meanwhile, Margaret's private investigator had been working his own angles. Jake Morrison was a retired Denver PD detective who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. Within 48 hours, he'd located Clara Rodriguez, the nurse mentioned in Eleanor's letter. She's 78 lives in Lakewood, Jake reported. Still sharp, still remembers that night. Says she's been carrying the weight of it for 40 years. But the most difficult part was yet to come. That evening, I sat in Sarah's kitchen while she prepared dinner, Derek working late at his investment firm. The house felt cold despite the warm lighting, too modern, too perfect. Dad, you seem distracted lately, Sarah said, not looking up from chopping vegetables. Are you eating enough? Sleeping? I watched her hands move with Eleanor's precise efficiency. She had Eleanor's blonde hair, Eleanor's blue eyes, Eleanor's gentle way of caring for others. How could this woman not be my daughter? but I had a job to do. When she stepped out to take a phone call, I quickly gathered a few strands of hair from her brush in the bathroom. It felt like the worst kind of betrayal, but I needed the truth. The DNA test kit sat on my kitchen table that night like an accusation. 2 small tubes, one for my saliva sample, one for the hair I'd collected. The instructions were simple enough, but the weight of what I was doing felt enormous. As I sealed the samples and prepared the shipping envelope, my phone rang. Derek's name flashed on the screen. "Marshall, we need to talk." His voice was sharp, impatient. "I've been thinking about Eleanor's estate, and I think we should meet this week. Sarah's been emotional since the funeral, and I don't want her stressed about financial matters." The timing wasn't coincidental. Derek was feeling pressure from somewhere, maybe his own financial situation, maybe sensing that I was pulling away from his influence. "We can discuss it next week," I said carefully. "I really think sooner is better. How about Friday? I can bring the paperwork I've been reviewing." After I hung up, I stared at the sealed envelope containing the DNA samples. In 48 to 72 hours, I'd know the scientific truth about Sarah's parentage. But Derek was already moving, already positioning himself for whatever came next. I drove to the FedEx drop box that night, sending the samples to the lab with expedited processing. As the envelope disappeared into the slot, I realized there was no turning back now. Eleanor's letter had started this investigation, but science would finish it. I was reviewing project budgets when Derek Sullivan walked through my door without knocking. It was 9 in the morning, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the calculating look in his eyes. "Marshall, we need to talk, now." In 5 years of marriage to Sarah, Derek had never visited my office unannounced. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait for a phone call?" He dropped into the chair across from my desk without invitation. "Eleanor's gone. Time to face reality about who runs this family now." The words hit me like a slap. Eleanor had been buried less than 3 weeks ago. Sarah and I had been discussing the inheritance. The company needs younger leadership, fresh ideas. I've been reviewing the financials. Some of these contracts are leaving money on the table. That affordable housing project is pure charity work. We could be building luxury condos instead, triple the profit margin. Through my window, I could see Rebecca Hayes coordinating with subcontractors, making sure families would have decent homes they could afford. "That project employs 40 people and houses 100 families," I said quietly. Derek waved dismissively. "Sentiment doesn't pay dividends. Sarah deserves better than your charity cases." "And what if I'm not ready to discuss inheritance?" His expression hardened. "Then we'll have a problem. Sarah is your only child, your only heir. She has rights, and I have a responsibility to protect those rights. If you try to delay the inheritance process, I'll take legal action." Sarah appeared in my doorway, looking pale and worried. "Derek, you said you were just going to talk to Dad about dinner plans," she said softly. Derek's just worried about our future," Sarah said, uncertainty in her voice. "With Eleanor gone, he thinks we should start planning." "Planning what exactly?" I asked, looking directly at Derek. "Planning how to carve up a company that's still alive." Derek stood up, straightening his tie. "Planning how to protect what's rightfully ours. Sarah deserves her inheritance, and she deserves a husband who won't let anyone take advantage of her generous nature, even family." The threat was clear. He was positioning himself as Sarah's protector, against me, her own father. After they left, I stood at my window watching the construction site. Rebecca was explaining something to Michael, both focused on blueprints. Their partnership was built on mutual respect, shared goals, genuine care for the work. The contrast was stark. Derek saw dollar signs where Rebecca saw homes. He talked about rights, while she talked about responsibility. Eleanor's letter had warned me the truth would be painful. But watching Derek reveal his true nature, his greed, his manipulation, his complete lack of respect for everything Eleanor and I had built, I realized the pain wasn't in learning the truth. The pain was in how long I'd been blind to it. My phone buzzed, DNA results ready for pickup. It was time to find out exactly what Derek thought he was entitled to inherit. Clara Rodriguez lived in a modest ranch house in Lakewood, her living room filled with photos of grandchildren and the warm smell of coffee. At 78, she moved slowly, but her mind was sharp as ever. "I remember that night," she said, settling into her favorite armchair. "2 babies, 2 mothers. It was the mistake that changed everything." Margaret and I sat across from her, listening to a story that had haunted this woman for 40 years. Clara's hands shook slightly as she opened a worn journal, its yellowed pages telling a different story than I'd expected. It was chaos that night. 2 deliveries at the same time, both complicated. Your wife, Eleanor, and another woman, Mrs. Patterson. Her husband was overseas in the military. Both babies were born within minutes of each other. She read from her journal, entry dated 40 years ago. Terrible mistake during bathing routine. Baby girls switched, accidentally. Discovered error after families had already bonded. Mrs. Patterson's husband returning from deployment. Eleanor and Marshall, so happy with healthy baby, decided not to disrupt either family. The clinical language couldn't hide the emotional weight of what had happened. A simple mix-up during the newborn bathing routine, discovered too late, when both families had already fallen in love with the babies they thought were theirs. I kept quiet because both babies were healthy, both were loved, Clara whispered. The Patterson family moved to California when the husband's military service ended. I lost track of them after that. But I never forgot what happened. 2 days later, Margaret called me to her office. The DNA test results lay on her desk, like a death sentence. The DNA doesn't lie, Marshall. Sarah's not your biological daughter. 99.9% exclusion rate. There's no margin for error. I stared at the scientific proof of what Eleanor's letter had told me. 40 years of fatherhood reduced to numbers on a lab report. What about our real daughter? I asked. Margaret's expression was thoughtful. If Clara's story is true, your biological daughter was raised by the Patterson family. Eleanor's letter mentioned she'd been watching someone from afar. We need to figure out if that someone is connected to the Pattersons. That evening, I sat in my study holding all the pieces: Eleanor's confession letter, Clara's journal entries, the DNA results. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. Derek had threatened legal action to protect Sarah's inheritance rights, but Sarah had no biological claim to inherit anything. The real question was, where was my actual daughter now, and had Eleanor somehow found her? Eleanor had hinted that I already knew her, that my heart had recognized what my mind couldn't understand. Someone whose character I'd admired, whose work ethic matched my own values. My phone rang, Derek's name on the screen. Marshall, I've scheduled our inheritance meeting for tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I'll bring my attorney. I suggest you bring yours. After I hung up, I looked at the evidence spread across my desk. Tomorrow, Derek would walk into that meeting expecting to claim control of my company through Sarah's inheritance. Instead, he was about to discover that his wife had no inheritance to claim. And somewhere out there was a daughter I'd never known. I had a daughter who deserved everything Derek was trying to steal. At exactly 2 o'clock, Derek Sullivan strode into our boardroom like he owned the place. He wore his most expensive suit, carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and had brought his attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, who looked like she ate family disputes for breakfast. Sarah followed behind them, looking pale and uncertain. She'd barely spoken to me since Derek's aggressive visit to my office, caught between loyalty to her husband and the growing sense that something was terribly wrong. Marshall, Derek said, not bothering with pleasantries. He spread documents across the mahogany conference table like he was dealing cards. These are the inheritance transfer papers. Simple and straightforward. Sarah gets her rightful share of the company, and we can all move forward. I remained seated, my hands folded calmly on the table. Margaret Sullivan sat beside me, a thick folder closed in front of her. My stillness seemed to unnerve Derek more than any argument could have. You seem confident about Sarah's inheritance rights, I said quietly. Of course I'm confident. She's your only child, your only heir. Eleanor's gone, God rest her soul, so the estate passes to the next generation. It's basic law. Derek's attorney nodded approvingly. Mr. Keating, my client, has prepared a very fair transition plan. You'll retain a consulting role and a generous pension. Everyone wins. I looked at Derek, really looked at him. His expensive watch, his manicured nails, his calculating eyes that saw dollar signs where I saw a family legacy. The man who'd shown such disrespect at Eleanor's funeral, who'd tried to intimidate me in my own office, who'd spent 5 years positioning himself for this exact moment. I know what you really are, Derek. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Derek's confident smile faltered slightly. Excuse me. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 67 years, but also feeling stronger than I had in weeks. You're a parasite who married my daughter for money. You've been circling this company like a vulture waiting for Eleanor to die so you could swoop in and claim what you think you're entitled to. Dad, Sarah gasped, but I held up a hint. You've calculated every move, haven't you, Derek? The expensive gifts, the business advice I never asked for, the way you've isolated Sarah from her friends. All of it designed to position yourself as the rightful heir to everything Eleanor and I built. Derek's face was flushing red. You're out of line, old man. Sarah is your daughter. She has legal rights. Does she... Margaret opened her folder and slid a document across the table. Derek's attorney leaned forward to read it, her expression shifting from confidence to confusion to alarm. What is this? Derek demanded. DNA test results, I said calmly. Conducted by an independent laboratory. The results show that Sarah is not my biological daughter. 0% probability of paternity. The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah stared at me like I'd slapped her, her face draining of all color. That's impossible, Derek whispered. I'm afraid it's not. Margaret's voice was professionally neutral. We also have hospital records, insurance claims, and eyewitness testimony from the attending nurse. There was a mix-up at the hospital 40 years ago. 2 babies were accidentally switched during the bathing routine. Sarah's voice was barely audible. I'm not your daughter. The pain in her voice nearly broke my heart. This wasn't her fault. She'd been an innocent baby raised with love, never knowing the truth. But Derek had built his entire future on a lie he didn't even know was a lie. You are the daughter I raised and loved, I told Sarah gently. That will never change, but biologically, legally, you have no claim to the Keating inheritance. Derek's world was crumbling before my eyes. His attorney was already packing up her papers, recognizing a lost cause when she saw one. This is fraud, Derek shouted. You're making this up to cut us out. The science doesn't lie, Margaret said, sliding another document across the table. Hospital records, insurance claims, nurses' testimony. It's all documented. I walked to the boardroom door and opened it. Rebecca, Michael, could you join us, please? My secretary entered, followed by Michael Hayes. Both looked confused by the tension in the room, but they took seats at the conference table. There's something you both need to know, I said, looking at Rebecca. Something about your family history that's going to change everything. Derek's face was purple with rage as he swept his documents back into his briefcase. This is fraud. I'll sue you for everything you're worth. You manipulative old bastard. Feel free to try, I said calmly. Margaret has all the documentation properly filed. He stormed toward the door, then turned back. You think you've won? You've destroyed your own family. For what pride, Sarah will never forgive you for this. After he left, the boardroom fell into heavy silence. Sarah sat staring at the DNA results, tears streaming down her face. I don't understand, she whispered. How could Mom never tell me she was protecting all of us? I said gently. She loved you, Sarah. That was never a lie. Sarah looked up at me with Eleanor's blue eyes. Eyes that weren't actually Eleanor's, I realized now. But you're not my real father. I'm the father who taught you to ride a bike, who walked you down the aisle, who held you when you cried. DNA doesn't erase 40 years of love. But Sarah was already shaking her head, standing up on unsteady legs. I need time to process this. I need to go. She paused at the door. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry Derek put you through this. But I can't just abandon my marriage, even if it's built on a lie, too. After she left, I turned to Rebecca and Michael, who'd been sitting in stunned silence. There's something you need to know, Rebecca. Something about your own family history. Rebecca's voice was barely audible. The Patterson family. Clara mentioned them. I nodded. Your adoptive parents. Eleanor spent years tracking down what happened to you after the hospital mix-up. She found the Patterson family in California, learned they'd given you up for adoption when military life became too difficult. Eleanor made sure you went to the best family possible. She may not have been able to raise you herself, but she never stopped watching over you from afar. Margaret cleared her throat softly. Eleanor's will specifically mentions this situation. Rebecca, as Marshall's biological daughter, you're entitled to the inheritance Derek was trying to claim. I don't want money, Rebecca said quickly. I have a job, a career I love. Eleanor knew you were special from the day you started working here, I told her. She used to watch you manage projects, solve problems that stumped people twice your age. She'd say that girl has the Keating instinct for building things that last. Michael squeezed Rebecca's hand. We never expected anything like this. Neither did I admitted. But Eleanor did. She planned for this moment, hoped for it. We moved to my office as the sun began to set behind the Rocky Mountains. The golden light felt like Eleanor's presence blessing this moment of truth and reconciliation. What happens now? Rebecca asked. Now we honor both mothers, I said. The one who gave you life and the one who gave you love. Eleanor and your adoptive mother both sacrificed for you in different ways. We'll make sure their legacy lives on through the work we do together." Rebecca looked at Michael, then back at me. "I'd like to learn more about the business side of the company. Michael's always been the technical expert, but maybe together we could—" "Together," I agreed. That's what Eleanor always wanted. A family united not just by blood, but by shared values and purpose. As we sat planning the future, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Eleanor's death: hope. Derek's greed had tried to tear apart everything we'd built, but Eleanor's love, even from beyond the grave, had brought us back together. Not the family we'd started with, but the family we were meant to be. 1 month later, I stood on the construction site of our latest project, watching Rebecca coordinate with the foreman like she'd been doing it her whole life. The Denver skyline stretched behind us, a testament to decades of Keating Construction's work, and I felt Eleanor's presence in the crisp mountain air. Mr. Keating called out Tommy Rodriguez, one of our veteran supervisors. "Rebecca's got some great ideas about the foundation work. Mind if we run them by you?" I smiled, remembering when Tommy used to call me the boss, with barely concealed skepticism. Now he looked at Rebecca with the same respect he'd eventually shown, me earned through competence, not inherited through title. "Rebecca's in charge of this project," I told him. "Her call." Rebecca approached us hard hat, slightly askew safety vest dusty from crawling around the site. She looked more at home here than she ever had in any corporate office. "The soil samples came back better than expected," she said, eyes bright with enthusiasm. "We can actually expand the foundation footprint without going over budget. More families, same cost. She knew you belonged here long before any of us understood why," I said, thinking of Eleanor's uncanny ability to see people's true nature. Rebecca's expression softened. "I've been thinking about that. About her watching over me all these years without me knowing. Speaking of which," I said, "the board approved your proposal for Eleanor's memorial garden at headquarters. Groundbreaking, next month." "Really?" Rebecca's face lit up. "Michael's going to be thrilled. He's already drawn up plans for the irrigation system." We walked through the site together, father and daughter in truth, now not just in heart. The workers nodded respectfully to Rebecca, asking her opinion on concrete pours and steel placements. She'd earned their trust through knowledge and genuine care for the work, just as Eleanor had predicted. "You know what I love about construction," Rebecca said, watching a crew frame out what would become someone's kitchen. "We're building more than structures. We're building futures. Families will make memories in these homes. Kids will take their first steps on these floors." Her words echoed Eleanor's philosophy so perfectly that I had to blink back tears. The daughter we'd unknowingly lost had found her way back to us, carrying the same values that had driven Eleanor and me for 40 years. "Eleanor would be proud," I said simply. "She was proud," Rebecca corrected. "She made sure I ended up exactly where I belonged, even when she couldn't raise me herself. That's not just love, that's wisdom." As we headed back to the office, I reflected on Eleanor's final gift. She'd seen what I'd been too blind to notice, that family isn't just about blood, it's about shared purpose, mutual respect, and the desire to build something lasting together. Derek had wanted to inherit a fortune. Rebecca had inherited something far more valuable, a legacy of integrity, a passion for meaningful work, and the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. Eleanor's plan had worked perfectly. Our family was whole again in ways I'd never imagined possible. The construction site hummed with activity around us: hammers, ringing saws, buzzing voices calling out measurements and instructions. It was the sound of progress, of dreams taking shape in steel and concrete. It was the sound of legacy continuing in worthy hands. This story teaches us that true family bonds are forged through love, integrity, and shared values, not just blood or legal documents. Marshall's journey reminds us that God often works through difficult circumstances to reveal deeper truths about the people in our lives. When betrayal stories like this unfold, they can either destroy us or strengthen our faith in divine justice. Eleanor's wisdom shows us that God sees what we cannot, guiding us toward the relationships that truly matter. Her posthumous plan wasn't just about protecting her husband. It was about ensuring that righteousness would prevail over greed. These grandpa stories resonate so deeply because they reflect the universal struggle between those who build legacies through honest work and those who seek to steal what they haven't earned. Derek's downfall proves that God's timing is perfect, even when we can't see his plan unfolding. The most powerful betrayal stories often end with restoration, just as Marshall found his true daughter when he least expected it. Similarly, the most touching grandpa stories remind us that wisdom and discernment come from years of experience and faith. Legacy isn't about what we inherit, it's about what we earn through character and dedication. What does the word legacy truly mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of family, faith, and justice.